Brilliant stuff from Ryan there. And thanks to Ryan and everyone else who's joined us today. Sadly, that is all we've got time for today. But as I mentioned at the start of this event, it's something that we're looking to do a lot more of in terms of providing this sector-specific advice for all of you back at home. On that note, we have prepared a few thoughts from all of the discussions today that we thought might be helpful for you. I'm sure you've got a lot of your own notes, but here are just a couple of things that stood out for us. So a few summary points. The first one is that investors need to look at companies in a different way. So what that means is that investors and analysts right now not only need to consider that impact of COVID on the kind of demand side of the healthcare companies that they're following, but there's this rising concern around the cost of materials and even disruption to supply. And as Chris mentioned during his talk, investors will be more risk focused. And so we really need to provide more assurance so that they're ready to pull the trigger. The second point is that the macro environment right now is fast, dynamic, and new for everyone involved. We did mention that most investors haven't seen this sort of high inflation at any point in their careers. So it is new for everyone. And IR, for any IROs that are working in the healthcare sector, it's really important to help provide that data and information that analysts and investors need to help them make an informed decision. Thirdly, the next point is don't let the macro dominate the narrative. So it is at the top of a lot of people's mind right now, but don't lose sight of the long-term story. I think it was Craig that mentioned, in the case of pharma, it's all about pipeline. So what we kind of take from that is if you're getting questions about some of these short to medium term effects, it needs to be put into context when you're communicating around these issues of whether it influences or how it influences those key drivers for the long-term success of your company. Our fourth point is to stay balanced in your communication with investors. So partly this is because a characteristic of healthcare is that it's a highly regulated sector. So it's more important than potentially other sectors to remember, not to promise the world, but also there's so much news flow in healthcare that, you need to consider whether you need to send a news blast out for everything. I guess the overwhelming point here is to make sure that, when your email lands in an investor's inbox, it's always going to be relevant so that it's always going to be opened and answered. Another couple of points that we had just to finish things off, bring your story to life and break through the clutter. So again, talking about the relevance and given the high levels of news flow, we heard some examples about how companies are bringing their story to life in that kind of title of their news blasts and press releases, but also through the content that they're including. And from the retail investor perspective, Michael shared some really innovative ways that you can engage that retail sector section of your investor base, whether that's through social media, through bloggers and influencers, podcasts, and a variety of other formats. There was also a more general point of tailoring your IR activities to cater for generalists and healthcare specialists. And what we put here is when educating generalists, remember your flip chart. A great sort of story that Craig told about, Thomas Larson stood there with a flip chart, visually demonstrating in a really simple manner, the different drivers of the business. So don't forget that. Another key message is don't boil the ocean. I quite liked this because it almost worked on two levels, both literally when we're thinking about ESG in terms of, rising global temperatures, but also figuratively, meaning that it's really important for you to focus on the ESG issues that matter most to your company. And those are so unique in healthcare as well. So that's one point. And our final thoughts from today is to communicate with transparency, especially during difficult times. So this is great IR advice for anyone working in any sector. But we did hear some specific examples just then from Ryan about communicating around when things have gone wrong. Don't show that it's financially motivated, or don't show that your communications are all about the finance. Make sure that your stakeholders are getting the information. And also he shared a great example about that roundtable with his management, where he's asking those really difficult questions that your investors and your analysts actually want to understand. So I hope that's helpful. As I say, I'm sure you've got many more notes yourself, but those are a few points that we think we thought might add there as well. Just a few housekeeping points before we go. For those that are interested, we do have the IR magazine spring edition hot off the press right now. Our big cover story is really an investigation into whether the virtual or the hybrid IR has actually resulted in a more diversified shareholder base. So that's definitely worth checking out. Just log on to your account at irmagazine.com and make sure that you read that, along with a whole host of other topics and articles, including a bit of an overview on the mentorship programs that are available to IROs globally. So that's definitely worth reading. We do also have a brand new report out, which is the Global IR Salary and Careers Report 2022. The best way I can sum this up is, if you're interested in understanding the different routes that people are coming into IR from, is great for that. But the really juicy stuff is sat there and looking at how much you earn compared to some of your peers. Valuable information, I'm sure. So definitely log on and get a copy of that as well. And finally, just from an event perspective, we are back in person. We talked a lot about healthcare going hybrid, but we are also in person as well. So the IR Magazine Think Tank Europe is happening in London on June 23rd. And that's a really interactive event. So there's some great roundtables where you can meet with, other heads of IR across different sectors to talk about the big issues facing IR officers in Europe. And for everyone that is stateside, we have our ESG Integration Forum Summer happening in New York. That's on July 14th. And we're very much looking forward, as we continually hear, ESG is an increasing issue. And this is perfectly timed to sort of recap on what are the investor priorities coming out of the proxy season, which will help you plan for the year ahead. So a couple of great events there as well. And all that remains is for me to say a huge thank you to all of you for listening in. As I mentioned, we really, really want to do more of this type of thing. We want to provide more relevant information, advice, and content based on the trends that are specific to you. So please do fill in the feedback form. Good, bad, and ugly. We want to hear from you and know how we can make these things a little bit better, or continue doing this type of thing as well. So without further ado, I think that brings us to a close. But thank you, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks very much.